There's a difference between a chef who talks about the work and a chef who's actually lived it. The kitchens that shape you, the mentors that push you, the losses that stay with you. That's the part of this industry people don't always see, but it is the part that defines you. Today's conversation is just that. It's about discipline over performance, substance over noise, and what it really means to grow in this industry when nobody's watching. Today, we speak with Chef James Versfelt. All that right now on the IncrEDIBLE Discourse. Welcome to the show, Chef. Thanks for coming on.
Mark, how you doing?
I just want to start with telling our audience where you came from, where you grew up, and what got you started in the industry.
That's a long story. I mean, really, the funny thing is that, probably like a lot of people, I never set out to be in this industry or to be a chef. It wasn't my goal. It wasn't my dream. I kind of made it my dream at some point, eventually. So I backed into it, probably in the beginning pretty unwillingly. And, I grew up, originally I was from Texas, and I grew up there really young, and then we moved overseas and then lived in several places. My father was in the oil business, and so we lived in the Middle East and Europe all throughout my later childhood and into my teenage years till almost the end of high school. And then,
oh wow, I did not know that about you. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, ironically, that was really kind of in a strange way. Out of the four kids in my family, I was the one that was there at the sort of oldest age and did all of it. Because my older brothers were old enough that my parents were concerned. They sent them off to boarding schools and different stuff, or they were starting college, et cetera. So I went through that whole sort of formative period in this lifestyle, which is very different than typically times when I was back in the States, Texas, or Jersey. Being around other people, I kind of always did my best to try to figure out how to fit in, or to sort of meld into reality. But like my reality was very different, lived in Iran for 4 years, lived in Israel for 2 years, lived in England for 2 years. And so I had a lot of different experiences, and things that were normal to me were just absolutely not normal.
Absolutely.
Or just completely not even fathomable to other kids my own age. So that being said, I had different goals and aspirations. I did schooling. I went to university. But during that time, once I turned 16, the expectation, I'd already been working, doing other stuff, but sort of off the grid, mowing lawns and different stuff. The expectation for my family, my father was, you want money, you need to make money. Right. So I tried to learn how to figure out how to hustle money. So when I turned 16 and I could legally work, I'm like, I want a job because, I want money. I want to be able to get a car. I want to be able to take girls out on dates or, buy records, whatever. So I just got the nearest, quickest, easiest thing. One of my brothers had already been in fast food, which was nearby. There was a big road, tons of fast food joints, and everybody knew that's where kids go get jobs, So I went and got a job at a fried chicken joint.
Nice.
Grandy's Fried Chicken, which was like a chain back then in Texas, and started working. I hated it.
I believe it.
I absolutely hated it. I hated working, I guess, was the real concept, or at least working for other people and or just being completely didn't know what the hell was going on. And in the space of like 2 months, that summer, the guy who was in charge of the kitchen, obviously there's no chef, there was he probably had some title as
manager,
kitchen manager, kitchen manager or supervisor or something. And he was a college kid, and he literally taught me 3 things, quit, and they said, "You're in charge." And I'm like, what?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thrown right into the fire, essentially.
I got thrown into the deep end right off the bat. And I think it's been pretty much almost like that pretty much my whole career.
Wow.
To the point where You either conquer, you figure that out, or you figure out how to process that in different situations. So in a way, I guess I eventually figured out, once I made my peace with work and, that kind of stuff, how to deal with it. But I think, growing up the way I did, now that I look back and constantly moving a lot and different schools and new people and languages, all that different stuff, I think you different food.
Absolutely.
You learn how to either assimilate and evolve, or you're gonna, you're not gonna prosper. Right. You're, as some of my, early chefs told me, it's this totally trite saying, but it's like you have to be like a shark. You got to keep moving. You got to keep evolving. Otherwise,
yep.
They breathe through their gills, and if they don't get oxygen,
right.
they die.
Yep.
So, as a chef, or as a cook, if you don't keep, my whole ethos was, you keep moving, you keep learning, you keep growing, you keep pushing yourself. And so I think I got that from my childhood. I don't think I really realized it, And my mother was an amazing cook, but she was like a food educator. I mean, really, she was. She went to university in Texas back when women weren't allowed to go to university.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was only one school that they could go to at the time. They couldn't go to A&M. They couldn't go to UT. They could TCU. They could only go to TWU in Denton, north of Dallas, Texas Women's University. It was expressly made for that.
Wow.
So this is right after World War II, the 40s. She was very smart, did a bunch of stuff. She was from East Texas, so she went there. And I don't know what else their whole program was, but basically she got a degree, went there for 4 years and got a degree in teaching and in teaching home ec.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Those days in high school throughout America, but especially in Texas, home ec was what it was taught. It's not taught anymore.
No.
And all women were expected to take home ec, and boys took shop or woodworking or male things, right. I guess. So they programmed us early on. But she did all that, and she really loved it, and she went on to be a teacher in high school and taught home ec.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so she started out that way, and then later, as she grew, into being sort of passionate about food and exploring, and this was, into the 60s and 70s, which is sort of the birth of American cuisine that wasn't just solely straight off the continent,
right.
in a couple of big cities, New York, Chicago, Boston, maybe San Francisco, right? So I grew up in the house where PBS was on all the time. And what was on PBS? Well, it would be Julia Childs,
yep.
James Beard, Graham Kerr, the Galloping Gourmet.
Yep.
And, they had supper clubs, and we had exchange students from the University of Dallas that we were a host family for. So we had Thai, Dutch, and so they'd have dinner parties all the time, and they would cook together, and they would, that's how you have a party back then, besides cocktails.
Right.
Great.
Yep.
And so it was all about this experimental time to try new cuisines and do different stuff. And that was the beginning of the whole sort of foodie revolution,
right.
Really. That I look back on the history of it and see it. So I grew up sort of being exposed to that early on. And then we started, we moved overseas, and they pursued, so we traveled all the time whenever we weren't there or, in school, time off. We didn't come back to the States for very long. We would travel throughout Europe and the Mediterranean and wherever.
Oh, wow.
And throughout all that, for me, it was always like the big thing was like food.
Right.
It was like,
eat something different.
What's the cool food? What is the new thing? What is the local thing? What do you like the best? And just always, they were super, super adventurous and exploring. So that kind of got rooted into my DNA. And I don't know, later trying to be a normal American high school type teenager kid just didn't really work out for me that
right.
much. So I was always kind of restless, and I love American food. I especially love Texas food, where I'm from, because it's like home. But people always say to me, every time I have an interview, every time you meet someone and you say you're a chef or you work in, I try not to even say that. Just be like, yeah, I work in
kitchens, in hotel.
I work in food business. Yeah. I'm a food and beverage manager in a hotel. Kind of thing Oh, that's so great. What's your chef? What's your favorite
Yep. What
food?
do you like to cook?
Then your next one, what's your best
Yeah.
dish?
Those are the worst. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you're like, and I'm like,
If they only
in the
knew.
beginning, you try to come up with something. You're like, you know what? I'm like, I can't give you an answer to that. I can say my best dish is, every dish that I make, I try
Right.
to make it my best dish.
Right.
And my favorite food to cook is, anything and everything. That's the whole thing. I love great
That's
food.
it.
So whether it's casual dining or fine dining, it can be an ethereal type experience. That's what I'm
Right.
chasing. So I was always chasing what I experienced as a kid. I still have very distinct memories of certain foods that I had at certain times. So later, I realized, wow, I kind of have a reservoir of sort of knowledge, but also sort of palate experiences that most cooks and chefs, when I was coming up 30 odd years ago, that they didn't have, because
Right.
nothing against them, but they hadn't traveled, they hadn't had the opportunity. So I had a real wealth of sort of, to tap back into that, the memory banks. So that was where, that kind of fueled me, and then, like I said, so I started in fast food, kept doing odd jobs, went to school, kept always working in food whenever I needed to pick up a job or on summertime or whatever. I did some other stuff, but it'd always come back to that because I could walk into anywhere and they'd just be like, "Oh, you have experience?"
Yeah.
And simply like, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
hired." Like you can count to 10, and yeah, and they're like, "Cool, you're hired." Yeah, great. So yeah, I had a mix of that. I worked in food, the food program where I went to school. The little snack stuff. They called it Munchie Mart where I
Right.
was, and so kept always doing that stuff. Didn't want to do it. I had other things I was pursuing. I went to film school after I
Oh,
went to
wow.
school. That was my dream. But then at a certain point, I realized living in New York, trying to work in the field, it's like, man, I can't make a living like this. And I was working in restaurants at the same time because that's how I could pay the
Right.
rent. At a certain point, you know, somewhere in my 20s, I'm like, why do you keep, why do I keep fooling myself? You're not gonna, it's just, that's not working out. And this is, but yet you're kind of making chump
Right.
change,
Right.
sort of stuck there in the middle, and you resent it a bit. Like, I want to be in
Right.
charge. I think, I know enough now, or perhaps, later you find out you don't know anything, but you knew enough to know that what you wanted, which was the ability to start being able to make decisions and the opportunity to help and lead others, along the
Right.
way, which is probably the biggest part of it, really, because then you end up getting into the management thing. So, that being said, that's kind of how it eventually, the groundwork was from then till I made that decision for myself. And then it was like, well, how am I gonna? I've already tapped out all my student loans and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go to, and I talked to different people I knew, and they're like, no, don't waste your time going, don't go to culinary school. In fact, actually, at a certain point after a few years, I decided I was going to go to culinary school, and I moved to New Orleans with a friend and a mentor that I worked for a bit in San Francisco that I met, but he was from there, and he was the first one. He went to CIA way back in the day. Don't go to
Yeah.
culinary school. It's a waste of time. It's a waste
Yep.
of money. I'd be like, yeah, easy for you to say, buddy. You're in the
Right.
gang. You're in the frat. You went to CIA. Anyone and everyone will hire you at any time. But so whatever. I went down with him to do a thing, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to go to. There's a good program there in New Orleans at one of their community colleges called Delgado, and I intended to do that, and then things changed. Got there, his stuff fell apart, and that was a great experience, sort of witnessing a lot of that kind of stuff early on in my career, a lot of implosions of people's restaurant dreams and things like that. And I had to go out and get a real job, so I went out and got a real job, and that's when I went to work with a New Orleans master chef. I got lucky enough to sort of pick the right place to walk into and start talking, and got hired, and that's how I started out, sort of in fine dining.
Wow.
And yeah, so That was Chef Michael Udo in New Orleans. This was back in the 90s. And pretty quickly, I realized I didn't know
Right.
anything.
Yep.
I was really stupid. When it comes to culinary sort of foundations, that stuff, because they're even the most generic sort of cook knew their mother's sauces, they knew French terminology,
Right.
they knew how to do every kind of knife trick in the world, the whole 9 yards, and I'm just like, wow,
Right.
I got to get my shit together.
And that was like you would say the first job that you had where it was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, yeah, probably. I mean, before that, the job that really made me kind of fall in love with everything about it, good and bad, was just prior to that when I was living out in the woods in California, south of San Francisco, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I kind of moved in with this person to live with, and then I needed to get a job, and that's all the experience I had. And there was the nearest place was this place that was like the only restaurant within like 20 miles, and I kind of just stumbled in there looking for a job, and just so happened that their previous cook. There was
One.
person for nighttime had just walked out, and I just sort of walked in at the right time. And this was like a couple, an American guy and a Swiss lady, who had this place, pretty infamous little place called Alice's Restaurant, for a while, and they were kind of kooky. And it was attached to like a garage, a '76 garage, and it was this whole gathering place for car enthusiasts and motorcyclists and all this different stuff. And so, but they had a really great little restaurant business there, and the breakfast and lunch was run by an extended Mexican family from Michoacan.
Oh, wow.
That lived behind there and nearby, but they didn't do nighttime because they had to have their family time. So they'd always have some dumb white kid to do that. And so I just sort of stumbled into it, started doing some stuff, what I knew, and quickly ran out of ideas and repertoire pretty quickly, because it was like a little fixed menu, but then you had to come up with specials and soups. And so I just I'd been doing some sort of gathering for a bit of time prior to that, and I just started reaching into the bag and trying to figure stuff. And so that was the beginning sort of the experimental phase. Lots of phone calls to old mom back in Texas. How do you do this?
Yep.
First thing out of her mouth, we started laughing. And so that, and then of course the cook, the main cook, and his family, but this guy named Rufo, who then would help me, then decided he liked me, and he'd help me at night, and so on the weekends or something. So we'd work together, and it was pretty cool. I didn't know at the time, I look back years later and realized how lucky I was, because it was this weird time and place where like people would come to the back door of the restaurant all the time and try to sell food to us, to me. It's not like, and it wasn't, corporate, it wasn't this, that, or the other, right? Get out of here. We can't do this. But I'd have people coming, because right nearby was all these different agricultural areas. We're about 50 miles north of Monterey. We were 5 miles from the ocean. There was a big growing area down the road I actually lived down there. It was an old Portuguese fishing town. So, but they grew like artichokes and strawberries, and there was a Portuguese like general store where they had bacalhau sitting out on the porch, and crazy stuff. It burnt down years later, but a whole long kind of culinary history in that area. So people would come up to the back door. There was like little weird farmers and growers, and also weird hippies that had been there since Ken Kesey time, because that's where they had done the acid test.
Oh, wow.
The first acid test in '64 was just down the road. And so there was just some strange people around there, and so strangely cool and individual. And they would show up, be like, "Hey, man, I've got all these." You'd be like, "What are those?" And you'd be like, "Oh, these are fingerling potatoes, but these are the original native species, indigenous from New York State. I brought the seeds here 20 years ago, and I've been growing them ever since." And you're like, "What?"
Wow.
So first time I ever saw multicolored fingerling potatoes, and fresh strawberries, that weren't all sprayed with chemicals. And there was a guy that would come that free dove for abalone and would come and
Wow.
bring me abalone once a week, and just crazy stuff like
That's
that. At
awesome.
the time, I was just kind of like, cool, this is
Right.
something new. I got to figure this out. And we didn't have the internet
Right.
back then, so you had to have
Mm-hmm.
cookbooks or someone that could help you. So between my friend and my mother and one or two, like a James Beard book, Julia Child, and Joy of Cooking, pretty much saved my ass for a
Right.
long time. So learn how to read a recipe, learn how to cook a recipe, and then figure out what you did wrong, and grow from there and start building your repertoire. So went down to go to school, went to New Orleans, fell into this job at this place, which was one of the top restaurants in the town at the time. And he had the chef there, Chef Mike, he had come out of, I mean, he went to French culinary in London, and then came from a rich family. But then he was kind of like their rebel, but their favorite at the same time. He came back to New Orleans, and he fell in with, first he worked for Emerald when Emerald was at
Right.
Commanders.
Commander. Yep.
So when Emerald became the executive chef of Commanders when he was 25 years old, he's still the youngest executive chef. Maybe it's changed since then, but at the time he was the youngest ever. He was kind of like the new guard. People now won't realize that, but Emerald back in the day was a crazy badass in a lot of ways. And so anyway, they were my chef who I worked for, and then his best friend, who was Jamie Shannon. They were the sous chefs there. And then Jamie Shannon went on to become the executive chef at Commanders for about 10 odd years after Emerald left to become
Right.
Emerald. Chef Mike, they worked side by side, so they were just, so came up hearing those stories and all that sort of, that was when sort of the beginning of, I wasn't even fame at the time. There was no TV
Right.
shows. There was just word of mouth, and there was reputation, and there was, oh, celebrities go to their restaurants and they're really expensive, and things like that. And then there in New Orleans, you went out after work, and certain places you just met people that you gathered together, and so you meet people that worked in all these different restaurants, these top, because it's a whole culture there. Food is, only thing more important than food there is
Right.
music.
Yep.
But it's just like everybody lives and breathes it. So it was an excellent melting pot for me, and then that's where I really, started to get on track with and realize that, yeah, this is what I want to do, good and bad. This is really difficult, but I love it. It was like, it felt like a lot of freedom, freedom in a sort of constrained way. It's like nobody cared who you were, nobody cared what you looked like, nobody cared how you acted, mostly, as long as you could
Right.
produce great food, produce the numbers, show up every day, and try to get better. And so it was very competitive within the kitchen, and so, but I guess nowadays they kind of call that toxic. I
Yeah.
don't know.
That's
But
yeah. It's changed a lot. I mean, yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly. So having been around for this long, I've had to learn and adapt, but I never forget those times and those lessons, that I
Yeah.
learned, because I don't think I wouldn't be who I am now as a food and beverage manager if I hadn't gone through that.
And yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of bad things involved in it, but I think there was a lot more good,
Oh, absolutely.
So
I mean,
it was like a
I
crucible.
think I think if you've been in the industry for any significant amount of time, right, you quickly realize that there's a lot more downs than there are ups, but the ups are really pretty fucking good. So, like that's kind of what you live for. And if you like what you're doing and you love it like we love it, then it's quite rewarding. Whereas someone who's not in the industry wouldn't necessarily see the reward in it.
No, it's not. I mean, I think, and not being a psychologist, I can't really pin down the exact details to it, but I know, and then having been a hiring manager for many years and kind of stumbling through that in the beginning and still
Right.
stumbling all the time, thinking, I've made a decent hire and whatever, and then being proven wrong time and time again. But that being said, I think it comes down to a sort of, it comes down to psychology. It comes down to people's character and it comes down to personality types and what motivates
Right.
people as to whether or not they're going to succeed or
Yep.
not. You don't have to be a genius to succeed. You don't have to be extremely talented at anything other than
Wanting to do it.
be well wanting to do it. But you have to be talented at being a hard
Right.
worker. You have to be able to challenge yourself more than anyone else will challenge you,
Right.
i.e., your chef or whoever. Because otherwise, you're not gonna grow, and you're not going to if you're not striving. That's my view. So, and you're not learning. So those two things together is sort of the recipe for success. So you have to have your own personal goals, and unfortunately, I mean, I know I did plenty of it myself to a certain degree, but it seems like most of the time nowadays, 80% of people within the business are just trying to chase. They're workers. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're chasing 50 cents and a
Right.
dollar all the
Right.
time, which I keep trying to tell people that's really
Right.
stupid, because you'll get that if you work hard where you are. You should leave a place if it's not going to challenge you, if you've exceeded what you can learn there, or what you can grow in that job. But don't leave for 50 cents or a dollar. If you're talented enough and you're ready to leave and someone offers you some good money and it's the right place, great. But too often people they come in, they'll work a month, 2 months, 3 months, and suddenly like, oh, I quit, or they just don't
Right.
show up or whatever. And then you find out, oh yeah, they went over there, and you're like, oh yeah, they got a dollar more. It's like, great, but at some point they're gonna hit the ceiling of the limit of their capabilities, and or they get found out that they're not a very good
Right.
cook.
And then they've burnt all the bridges on their resume, and you're stuck
Yeah.
now.
And
Yep.
when I was young and people were bad or weren't with the program, and I probably wasn't that good of a manager, I had a lot of confrontational events, but you work your way through that and you figure out that doesn't really work. So I work really hard to try to get through to people, to communicate with them, to also tell them from the beginning before they even get hired or accept a job of what the expectations are. But people are too easily able just to say whatever they think you
Right.
want to hear, unfortunately. But that's fine. I get it. So you have to learn, my job, our job, manager's job over the last 10 to 15 years is learning how to become a very careful, guarded, well spoken, corporately minded HR
Right.
manager, which
A,
is,
a
good
task
and
in
bad.
itself, right?
It
Yeah.
is, yes. It can be wearing, and it can be stressful at times, and it can just be kind of overwhelming where it takes your focus off where you want your
Right.
focus to be, which is on the food. And, yeah, I understand, you got to get people motivated. We had to get motivated when we were on the line, or you're having a bad night, or somebody fucked up, on something. Chef turns around, it's like, forget about it. Just get another one
And
done.
that's
We'll juggle
yep.
the tables and we'll figure it out. When they knew that, even then, so you knew you had a good team when if your chef had your back, even when you screwed up, because he knew that you were going to be harder on yourself than he
Right.
was going to be, and that you were going to figure it out. And even later, you'd be like, look, what did I do wrong? Or how can I do it? What's a better approach? Or what should I
Right.
do? Then he gave a
Right.
shit about you.
Because you were
You
trying
know,
to hone the craft. Yeah, it wasn't
yeah,
about the money, it
ex-
was about the actual craft. Right.
exactly. Everybody in my kitchen in New Orleans, everybody wanted to be a
Right.
chef. Everybody from that kitchen went on to be a
So
chef.
when you left New Orleans, what did you do after? What I mean, because I know you're pretty well traveled in the US alone. So I mean, I met you in Miami, you worked in New Orleans, you've been everywhere I've ever wanted to go. So um how did you
As all the interviewers always say, you've been in so many places.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you've had some really great jobs though along the way though. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So where did you go from New Orleans, or how long did you stay in that one job?
I was there about 2 years,
Oh,
almost two
okay.
years. During that time, we did a James Beard dinner,
Oh, cool.
and yeah, he was the chef. He was invited up. We went up. That's a whole chapter in
Right.
itself. But yeah, I was just recently in New York with my son, and I was pointing things out. A couple of things from that trip alone, came up in the back of my mind. Great experience. That was when they still did the dinners in James Beard's old townhouse, and you cooked in his kitchen.
Oh my gosh.
Which was, at the time I appreciated it, but I didn't appreciate it enough. Years later, I really more understood, and it was just like, wow. But yeah, we had a great time, especially just complaining like, God damn, why didn't we bring more equipment with us? Because there was nothing there. Like, oh yeah, everything's here, no worries. It's this entire kitchen. You get there like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Luckily we had some knives with us, but other than that, there wasn't much. So we were figuring things out. But yeah, it was fantastic. But so after New Orleans, I went back to California. Okay. Went through that next sort of dreaded phase of the young chef sort of evolution, where you've had a title or two, you kind of think you know what you're doing, and then you're working on, you don't know that your ego is getting ahead of yourself.
But you were still in fine dining at that time? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Like I said, I was in fine dining all the way until I came back and was in Miami.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So over exceeding myself and or taking opportunities. Oh yeah, great. The money, the title, getting in bed with like really bad operators that were shady or doing weird shit, and then having restaurants implode underneath you and that kind of stuff. So yeah, but it's a great, you can't teach that in the CIA lab. Correct. And you can't teach that online. You can only teach that by going through it. I don't recommend it to anybody. That's why I always say, like, look, man, choose your steps very carefully. Try to stay, if you're proceeding to try to be a great chef someday, spend 2, 3, 4 years at 2 or 3 places, the right places, with the right ability to grow within them, and then you're going to be ready. Most cooks nowadays, even if they are minded that way, they don't have that kind of patience.
Not for 3 or 4 years at all.
It's hard for me to even, people be like, well, you're full of shit. Yeah, because I did it the hard, dumb way, and I learned from it, but I learned the hard way, which was those kinds of experiences. And so eventually, and then, life is always in there, mixed in. Absolutely. Personal life, different things, decisions, and whatever. So down the road, I eventually came down to Miami. I had both my brothers that lived there, but I came down there and I had visited, and I didn't really like it.
From California?
Yeah, right after college. One brother tried to get me to move there, and I came, and everybody spoke Spanish, and I'm just like, this place is crazy. There's no way I can live here.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm like, this is nuts. And it seemed very small townish, which it was at the time, because that was probably 87.
Down in the city of Miami.
Well, he lived in the Grove.
Oh, okay. So Coral Gables, Coconut Grove area.
Yeah, I mean, he lived in Coral Gables by the Grove, and then I got taken out to Miami Beach, and everybody's just sitting on the porch waiting to die. And it's like, I don't want to be here. Yeah. I want to be like New York or, somewhere like, wow. But but yeah, years later, going through different formative cooking and sous chefing type experiences, I come to Miami from New York. I was in California. I went to New York, back again with this chef, the guy for the New Orleans guy, second New Orleans guy that I met there. He'd gotten a job in New York, and then at some point I'd like, need to work, and he's like, well, come out here. I got you, gig, whatever, title, this, that, and the other. So I was in New York, working for Arc Restaurants. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but they're pretty big. They've been bought since then, but they're a big independent restaurant operator. At the time, the corporate chef was Jonathan Waxman.
Oh, yeah, I know Jonathan Waxman. Yep.
And his assistant he went on to be Eric Ripert's exec sous at Le Bernardin.
Oh, okay.
So they had some pretty high level of stuff. This place we went to work for is not there anymore. They had 2, one in DC, one there in New York on the South Street called Sequoia. It was a huge, huge restaurant, like 550 seats.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
We had three on two levels. We had three meeting rooms, banquet rooms, whatever we want to call them, and huge menu, 60, 65 items. Part of the menu was Chinese, was a Chinese. So we had a mini Chinese kitchen within the
Oh,
kitchen.
sure.
So as a whole, which is pretty typical in New York back then in the day, still is to a certain degree some places. So that they had their own little thing. So that was a very interesting experience. I worked at another place in New York as well that had a many part of the menu was Chinese, and so they only have Chinese cooks that did that, and then they didn't answer to the chef. They
It's like their own separate department kind of deal. Oh,
kind
okay.
of technically no, but reality yes. Is basically the chef didn't fuck with them, they wouldn't fuck
Right,
with the
right.
chef. They show up every day, they do their work, they spoke their own language, they made their food. One guy could speak enough English to tell the chef, "This is what I need for supplies for the week or whatever," and they would do their thing. So they make their dumplings and dim sum and what fried wok stuff, whatever.
Did
And
you ever get into that part of the kitchen? Like, you have experience cooking Chinese food?
well, I did later, yeah. I mean, and then once I was at this Sequoia place, and then I was basically initially tasked to be the banquet chef for just the lunches. They typically did it for lunch, tour groups, because it was South Street. Buses would come in, they'd have these package deals, and we'd have to feed 100 to 200 people per room.
Jeez, that's killer.
And sometimes do flip the room twice. So it could be anywhere from one group to six groups in a 2 or 3 hour lunch period. While the main service was, there was two different kitchens. There was the main kitchen, all in one same level, then a very very long distance, and then the back sort of prep kitchen, which was also the banquet kitchen. And that was sort of my first exposure to that. But then, so started off with that, and then the other person who was in charge of backing up the chef in terms of the a la carte service, the biggest amount of business was lunchtime,
Right.
because we were very close to Wall Street. So Wall Street is a short walk over. So you'd see traders over there, and then tons of tourists. And we were directly across the water from the Water Cafe, which was David
Oh
Burke
yeah, David
in
Burke. Yep.
in Brooklyn. So this is all during this time. Again, sort of like the next second phase of the beginning of the modern American cuisine. All these chefs went on to become very big, successful, chefs, and are now kind of regarded as sort of the second generation
Pioneers. Yeah.
pioneers. Well, that yeah. So they either worked, those guys, gals and guys, cooks, chefs. They either worked for like Alice Waters, at some point. So if you're California, if you didn't work for Alice, well, everybody worked for Alice Waters at Chez Panisse in Berkeley was made. And then the East, you need to work at a key place and get your cred and move on from there. So New York's definitely a great melting ground for that. So that was a great school of just like, holy shit, how do I do this?
And so you went
So,
from New York down to Miami. So from New Orleans to California, New
yes,
York, and then down to Miami.
yep.
Wow,
So then after New
that's
York,
crazy.
for personal reasons, whatnot, decided to just got to get out of New York, and got out of New York, went down. Person ended up becoming my wife. I had used to go down to Miami in the wintertime from New York all the time. So it's like, yeah, great, we can go down there, and it's really easy, and there's like little hotels, and you can just live. It's super fun. It's super cool, and that's what we did. So came down there to the beach, really beach, and I never lived in Miami. Always lived on the beach and watched the beach change underneath me over 20 plus years. But really bounced through one or two little places, some places, and then eventually ended up Tantra right after Michelle Bernstein had left. She was the second or third chef there. Funny thing is, Miami, the scene then was so small that everybody knew everybody. So Michelle was there before me. Before her was Michael Jacobs, who I ended up working for later. So it's a whole little kind of small group. So a lot of people went through there, and so that was sort of the beginning. From there, I worked for some years in the Miami Beach sort of fine dining
And that
scene
was what,
for quite a while.
early 2000?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
99 2000.
Yeah. So Michelle Bernstein, Norman Van Aken, Cindy Hudson. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, exactly. I mean, if I didn't work for one of them, then I had somebody that worked for them that I worked with
The
or I
network.
hired.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I was at the Versace mansion, because I was working for Barton G, and then they took that over and ran it, and I opened it along with the corporate chef at the time. I needed just a second cook. Just had a garde manger cook, and so she, they would do desserts, plate desserts. Desserts actually came over from Barton G restaurant. They would plate desserts, sometimes make some stuff, salads, and cold hors d'oeuvres when we had little events and that kind of stuff. So I ended up hiring this person. She had worked for Norman, which was one of the reasons why I decided, this person was going to hopefully be pre-trained and serious. And yeah, they were good, and they went on to grow and do a lot of
That's
stuff.
awesome.
That person was Nina Compton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she went on to be chef at Scarpetta
Yep.
for Scott Conant, and then she went on to create her whole own
That's
career.
crazy.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just did this interview with Norman Van Aken 2 weeks ago, last week, and it's so interesting how, as chefs, we're in the industries and we never get a chance to sit down and have these stories, this exchange of stories. And now that I've had a opportunity, speaking with you and speaking with Norman, like, it is so interesting how small the world actually really is when it comes to Miami chefs, and in that kind of circa of early 2000s. It's super crazy how everybody legitimately is connected in some way or another. It's
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. It was a very small world. There wasn't that many super high end fine dining places at the time. There was Norman's. There was Pacific Time, which was Jonathan Eisman. There was Tantra was kind of regarded in some ways. There was a few other places. Of course, there's Joe Stone Crab, but it's not
Right.
a lot of money, but not necessarily the culinary credibility. But now it's a historic sort of type thing. Like Norman, I actually never ate at Norman's, never met Norman in person, although I've talked to him on the phone a couple times about jobs and projects over the years. Seemed like a great guy, but definitely a real role model in a lot of ways. But I came to know Alan
Oh, wow.
Susser pretty
Yeah.
well after having. I turned down a job when he still had Chef Allen's up in
Right.
Aventura, chef cuisine job there that I thought I wanted, and he offered me, and then I turned it down for reasons. But then later down the road, I met him again and at like some events, and then later during COVID, he was a consultant at the food hall that I was working on down in Coconut Grove, and so it's a very small
Yeah.
world. So it's definitely good to make relationships. It taught me a lot about learning how to get outside your skin as your own person and have a professional sort of demeanor and really push yourself to make
Yeah.
relationships with people, even if it's two sides of the
Right.
road. There's work, so you can be convivial and friendly and whatnot because it pays off down the road. If you want to just be kind of stove cold and like not participate in some of the social niceties, it's going to
Yeah.
burn you later
Absolutely.
on.
So you went from fine dining into the stadiums? Was that kind of like the next phase?
Um, yeah, I mean, in my mind, I wasn't doing that. In my mind, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go into big buildings, into that world at the time. But my wife and I, our son came along, and I just had kept climbing, and I was in that sort of that fine dining, nighttime only, late night F&B
Right.
world, and I was getting kind of older, and it's a young man's world, and there's really nowhere to go from there. You know what I mean? So I realized, and or I was sort of arm twisted, and convincing myself that I had to make sort of the next jump into the sort of a next phase for me. So the last sort of fine dining project I did was with a group that came in from California, one of the early ones trying to like blow Miami Beach up. This was Table 8. It was in a hotel. And so sort of dipped my foot into the hotel world and started to see that. And I realized, wow, I want to do this. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to get that experience so that I can be credible applying for hotel sous chef type jobs. But through that whole little project was co-funded and managed in a weird sort of thing by Levy Restaurants out of Chicago, who were just at that point had just been bought by Compass and were starting to grow in much more forcefully into the big building world because, they're a restaurant company and they're going to bring operators. They're going to bring, that fine dining and that, that whole other feel that to that point in the early 2000s, stadiums weren't regarded in that way. There wasn't fine dining in stadiums. There wasn't celebrity chefs. It was just, concession slop and some buffet crap in the VIPs, and there was the sweet stuff. And that was it. So it was sort of the beginning of that whole thing. That was, like 20 years ago now. So we were co-managed. That kind of broke apart, fell apart. Anyway, I met some connections there. When it came time down the road, I'm reaching out. And just so I was able to get into and start to go to work with Levy when it was AAA, where the Heat play, which was kind of, that was the heyday of the Heat. And it was kind of a big deal in Miami. And it was also just sort of the beginning, a lot of the beginning of where, we were one of the first places in the country that brought in, local celebrity chefs. The chef who I went to work for there hired me was actually a French master chef by the name of Eric Chopin, who had come from a background in hotels, Ritz-Carltons and all that, had come from a pretty strict upbringing in France, first in the military and then, in the French sort of brigade system world of cooking. And so to kind of be a part of that, trying to see that implemented in America, especially in Miami, was both terrorizing and hilarious at times. But because the level of his expectations were just, for the most part, unattainable most of the time. And it would fall on us. There was 4 or 5 chefs in the middle ground where we would have to try to sit there and sort of horse whisper to be like, that's not going to work. We can't do that. Or no one's going to show up tomorrow. And unfortunately, big buildings like that, you need hands. And they're all temporary seasonal workers, most of them. And so it's the beginning of that whole of the modern mentality. That was probably, so I think working for them and starting to work in that world while I still sort of had a semi-elitist fine dining a la carte mentality inside my head was the beginning, sort of the next phase for me of learning, how to manage better, properly, or try to be properly, to manage well against really strong headwinds or, swimming upstream every day in terms of getting labor, keeping labor, making labor get the job done. Struggling between screw it, I'm going to do everything myself, and understanding that you can't.
Not an operation that big, not at all.
Not in any operation really. I mean, other than a very small.
But I mean, in that environment,
can't do it.
Yeah, but that environment. So just for context for the audience, like I met Chef James as the guest chef for the Florida Panthers in, what would you say, that was 2017-ish?
That was
2018, right? And so when we came up to visit you and the staff, you actually walked me around the stadium to all the remote kitchens and the 2 clubs. And I was blown away by how much you had to manage and how many different teams and different cuisines and different setups and different times and I was remember driving back, because we're live down in Miami from the stadium is like 45 minutes to an hour drive. And I was telling my partner at the time, like, I can't even wrap my head around how this one person has the capacity to manage all of that and still do it, because I mean obviously it's the Florida Panthers, right? They don't play once a month, they play, you know, a couple times a week. So you're constantly doing everything for everybody and trying to manage all that. It's absolutely wild what you had to do to put together an operation like that.
Yeah. It's I don't know. You don't like it's you grow
Right.
into it. At least I did, and it's what has kept it engaging for me for years now. Is sort of it's just a daily
Right.
challenge. So it's sort of a mental 3D chess kind of game every day. It's kind of all consuming to a certain degree. So, it's a good thing that you wouldn't be talking to my wife right now because she'd have a lot to say.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, my statement always is like, look, you may not have realized it, but you knew you were getting into when we
Right.
got together. I've told you from the beginning, this is everything for me. And this is, so yeah, good and bad. I'm always trying to stay ahead of get on that train. It's either get on the train or get
Right.
off the train. So I think, starting off with Levy and working with the heat operation, and then later opening Marlins Park
Wow, that's crazy.
with Levy, that's a whole other thing. Like opening a building, and then baseball, which is like 3 times as hard as
Because there's just so
basketball.
many damn games, right? Plus the events that they have at
Yep.
the stadium. Yep.
Yep. So there's 84 home games, 84, 85 home games that year. Plus, it was the first year, so we had all these crazy extra events
Concerts
that typically you may
and
not always have.
Monster Jam.
Concerts and big.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and then big people did catering too. People hired it out. We did parties for like 2,000 people and stuff. Buffets. We did plated.
Wow.
That's where I did like the biggest events I've ever done. Pretty much was we did one plated event was like it was almost 3,000. I think it was
Wow.
somewhere 2,500 to 3,000. All the other chefs had been shipped up to Brooklyn to support the Nets building opening, and like another one was, I don't know, on vacation or something. I was the only chef in the building, and literally I started working on that event 2 weeks ahead. Created 2 different teams, so we played it on 2 sides of the building. Those are the kind of challenges. That's the kind of that I enjoy. That's what keeps it enjoyable for me. Is like
The constant
to be
challenge.
frank, it's to wake up every day and be like, how fucked am I today?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said that.
What am I gonna
love
do?
that you said that.
How am I gonna
Yep.
do this? And so preparation is key to keeping yourself from just not completely freaking out and going, oh,
Yeah.
holy crap. So so I've learned it. I learned all those things in sort of incremental steps. It's only maybe recently in the last, I don't know, 5 odd years that I've gotten to the point where I know what level I need to plan and ahead and how much to a certain degree, and then I leave the rest to a sort of day by day progression. If I try to put it all together in my head every day, way in advance, it's overwhelming, But that's where foundation is so important, I believe, for me and for any operation that I'm, put in charge of and put in terms of managing and running it and trying to make it successful. So, foundation is a solid foundation. So I always, there's another stupid analogy I use. People hate it, but I call it the hurricane analogy. Having grown up in Texas and lived in Florida for so long, it's like, and I've seen it, the literal part of it. It's like if you build a house in a hurricane zone and you don't put down a proper foundation,
It's gone.
and not even just a regular foundation or even a good regular foundation, if you don't take and drill down your freaking foundation post, especially if you're right by the water, whatever, a long way down, elevate, do whatever it is, spend that extra time, spend that extra money, planning, everything. When that one big storm finally comes along, you're going to get blown the fuck away and you're done.
Yep.
You're toast. There's no like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know what it was.
Or can I go back and fix it now? No, it's done. Right.
Yeah, no. Well, when it gets into our world,
Right.
you're out of a job.
Yep.
You're done. So I know I was told this many times by my mentors in the past, and I would laugh and scoff at them, and they'd be like, "Yeah, don't
You're gonna
worry,
find out.
just wait, you'll see."
Yep.
Yep. So years later, I definitely ate crow a few
Right.
times and contacted back old chefs of mine and be like, you know what, you were right, and thank you. And I think back on everything you taught me, whatever I can remember, which is a lot, all the time. And I appreciate that. And I never told you thank you then because I was a
Right.
dumbass,
Right.
but I'm going to tell you thank you now.
So wrapping up a little bit here, Chef, I'm going to ask you one question because a lot of our conversations kind of would lead to this. If you could put a message out there to young chefs and chefs in the industry coming up, what is one thing that you would tell them to for them to finally realize the dream of being the chef? What's your ultimate message?
I think that the people that succeed because they can overcome adversity at every level. So you want like one sort of maxim of like what is the biggest, most important takeaway for
Yeah,
a young.
if I am 25 years old and I just got out of culinary school, or I have 5 years experience in fine dining, and I think this is for me and this is what I want to do, but I need somebody way up to tell me what is one thing that I need to do to persevere through the bullshit.
Trying to boil it all down is really difficult. But I mean, I would say for me at least, the most important thing, and it's very generalistic speaking, there's so many ways that it applies, but I would say you need to have patience with yourself, be intelligent and not impulsive.
I love it.
But at the same time, you still need to have you need to have passion
Right.
too.
Right.
Passion is something that I don't know if there's any way to quantify it. I'm not sure what it is about this thing that we do, this field, this career. Granted, there's so many different aspects to it. Say to a young cook is like, hey, build your repertoire now, learn all that stuff, get it to where it's deep inside you. It's not in a book. It's not. I mean, you need to read the books. You need to know all that knowledge, but you can't refer back to. You've got to have a repertoire that you
Right.
can cook. That's what the cooking and working in the line and doing all that for years. That's
Yes,
what
sir.
builds you if you work in the right
Yep.
places. But from that, the next part is the business, and then the business is the numbers, all that, and the management of essentially labor, which is
Right.
part of the numbers. But those then become, and then essentially once you get into either big buildings or hotels or even multi-outlet, multi-unit restaurant companies, whatever, you're becoming a senior chef and you keep growing in that way, that becomes
Yeah.
almost all of it.
All right, Chef. So for all the listeners, where can we find you? What's your Instagram handle?
Well, on Instagram, it's Chef James Versfelt. I think I've got a little under whatever you call those little
Yep.
under
Yep. Under.
hyphens,
Yep.
under spaces. Yeah, there. It's a mix of food and just other things that inspire me on a inspire my cuisine or my food or what I do, which is for me is beverages and music and culture and history kind of all comes together. I mean, that's what fascinates me about food. So that's what keeps it's fun is always learning new things and understanding why we do what we do with food, and then that gives you an ability to then maybe say, well, maybe I'm not going to do it that way. Maybe I'm going to break the rule or break the mold. But when I'm doing that, I'm still going to think about the chemistry involved, and I'm going to think about all these other factors. So for me, that's what keeps it endlessly interesting, and trying to marshal all that, and then just have one person be able to come to you, or you hear from somebody else. Oh, so and so said they just had the best meal of their life, or I've had this dish in many places, but this is the best I've ever had. So I guess it's a little bit of like sort of you're looking for praise. I don't know, maybe a little bit, I mean, we all have to maybe admit that to ourselves.
Right.
At the very least, it does help all the other stuff go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
When you occasionally get the feedback of like, yeah, I just want to have somebody go, this is really good, because I guess
Right.
it's validation, like hard work and the time you put in. I think it's we have a certain personality type where we want to give something to somebody else. And I think it's part of the driving factor. And what you asked about of like, what is there, what is it that motivates us, me, or anyone who's young and striving to get into the field is like, it's about that connection that you're trying to create with somebody else, and then see if you can replicate it over and over and
Yep.
over again.
All right, Chef. Well, it was great having you on the show, man. We should do this again sometime. Thank you, Chef. All right.
All right. Thanks, Mark. All right. Talk soon. Bye.
Today's final thought leads us to this. Every chef starts somewhere. For some, it's fine dining. For others, it's a fryer, a prep table, or a fast food kitchen just trying to keep up. But where you start isn't what defines you. What defines you is what you choose to build from that foundation. Because what we heard today, going from a fried chicken chain to running kitchens inside major arenas for the Florida Panthers and Miami Heat, that doesn't happen by accident. That comes from discipline, from repetition, from learning the fundamentals and never walking away from them. And more importantly, it comes from patience. Patience to stay in the process. Patience to learn before you lead. Patience to understand that this craft isn't something you rush. It's something you earn. Because eventually the conversation shifts. It stops being about how well you can cook and starts being about how well you can run a kitchen. And that's where a lot of cooks get exposed. Not because they don't have talent, but because they skip the foundation. So the question is simple. Are you building your craft or are you rushing your way through it? Because in this industry, the foundation always shows. So, next episode, we're getting into one of the most important and most misunderstood parts of this industry, food cost. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but what those numbers actually say about your systems, your discipline, and your ability to operate at a high level. Because if you can't control your cost, you don't control your kitchen. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And as always, keep learning, keep pushing, and keep showing up ready to work. I'll see you next time on the IncrEDIBLE Discourse.